On January 17th, 2015, we held a memorial service for Mark John Stella. This is a recording of two of the eulogies, that of myself, his brother, Fred Pug Stella, and my wife, his sister-in-law, Teresa Thome. We're very sorry. We intended to be able to record the entire memorial service, which included remarks by our cousin, Thome Stella, who officiated, along with other people who spoke and read. Unfortunately, those did not make it to the recording, but we hope that you can appreciate the remarks that you do hear. We begin here now with Teresa about 60 seconds into her eulogy. We'll pick it up in progress.
In fact, their love for each other shone so brightly often when they were together, at least to me, and at least on one occasion to some others, and I have to share this story because it's one of my favorite stories about both men. I was at a party, and Pug and I lead very separate lives, and so he arrived and I arrived separately, and he brought Marco because if there was ever free food, he would definitely bring Marco, and Marco, just like him, wanted free food wherever he could get it. And so the two of them arrived at this party, and throughout the evening I'd see them kind of chatting, and Mark would always find one person who he could have a very deep philosophical conversation with, and so I'd look over and they'd be in conversation, and I didn't really engage with them that much at the event because I know them. And so at one point I was sitting on the couch with a gentleman, and we were chatting, and Pug and Marco came up, and Marco in his very quiet way. And Pug said, I'm leaving. I said, okay, I'll see you both later, and they left, and the gentleman sitting next to me went, they're cute. and I said, excuse me? And he said, they're a cute couple. And I said, well, that would be my husband and his brother. But they were cute together. He said, don't tell Mark that. When he realized sometime into the relationship that I was probably going to stick around, he requested a one-on-one with me. Yeah. I was scared to death. But I was excited to share a little bit about myself and let him know why I was in this relationship and why I loved his brother. But I realized very quickly that Mark was not interested in what I had to offer. He really wasn't even that interested in me at this point. He was more interested in letting me know what was important to make a good impression on Mother and the family. So we went to a bar, and for an hour, he sat and told me everything that I needed to do to make a good impression on the family, and on Jean especially. He wanted me to make a good impression on Jean. We heard that last time. It took a long time. I didn't listen here. But one of the things that I remember, in fact, probably the only thing I remember, because the whole time I was just kind of chuckling to myself as this whole interaction was happening, because it was just so surreal, was that he wanted to make sure that I sent Pug home with clean underwear. Especially white cotton t-shirts. Like, he wanted to make sure that if Pug went home to Jean, he was pressed and clean from the inside out. So what I've written here is, apparently the way to his mother's heart was through folded white cotton tees, and he was emphatic about that, and he was right. It was very practical. He was a very practical man. Over the years and in between travels, Mark and I would spend time together at meals mostly, a rare family function, and time in Grand Rapids. And it wasn't until he came back from his last overseas excursion that we started to get much closer. When he was in Detroit, and then especially when he moved to Grand Rapids. I believe part of that had to do with him realizing that I was here to stay. He took a little more interest in me at that point, which was wonderful. And part of it had to do with my ability to see more of him. Not physically see more of him, but see him as a whole. As a scholar and a music lover, and a classic movie fan, and a person with a genuinely loving heart. You know, in the Grinch Who Stole Christmas, when the Grinch hears the Who's singing and the heart grows 10 sizes that day or whatever that is. That moment for me occurred when Marco and I were in my kitchen, and I was making some dinner, and I'd had a really stressful day at work, and he was there. And we had kitchen moths, which we have again. And the kitchen moths are these little tiny moths that get in like birdseed or something. And they were flying around, and as I was talking to Marco, I was smacking, I kept smacking the birds, the moths, and I looked over, and Marco was standing, and he had a pounded ball jar with a top, and he was standing like this, and he just, and I, in my moment going, so anyway, and I'm looking over, and I'm like, what the hell is he doing? And he didn't say anything. I killed all the moths, and it dawned on me, he wanted me to catch them and release them. And he was asking me in his own sweet, simple way. That's Mark to me. He was adorable, and I'm grateful that I had the opportunity to see that side to him, because I can guarantee not many people got to see that side. Watching him care for his mother and struggling to care for, darn thing, for his mother because of his own physical limitations. That's not what I want to say. Watching him care for his mother and struggling to care for his mother, struggling because of his own physical limitations, was one of the most generous acts of compassion and loyalty that I have ever witnessed. I wasn't the only one to recognize this. The hospice nurse who came in to help Jean broke every rule in the hospice book. She refused to limit the amount of time she spent helping. The social workers, everybody was trying to intervene, saying, you cannot spend time with this family. And that woman said no. And I know she said no because she wanted to be there for Marco, because she saw his compassion and she saw his frailty. It was powerful. She came to Jean's wake in Michigan and said that was the only wake she'd ever been to. She'd been a hospice care worker for 15, 20 years. He appreciated her deeply. Marco appreciated this woman so deeply, and when Mark appreciated you, you could feel his unconditional love. Of course, if Mark didn't care for you, you could also feel that unconditional love. He did not suffer fools gladly. He was not without his challenges in a social setting. He was not without his challenges in life. He was a contradiction. He was the guy you thought that was too fragile to function, but traveled all over the world and held on for 2 months. He was the guy who would get overwhelmed about being around family, yes, but talked so lovingly about you that when he finished a story, you loved you more than you did before. And for those who didn't know you, they loved you. He was the guy who would lament repeatedly about his mother, but took care of her to his dying day. He was the guy who would crank at just about every small thing in life, but would also find the time to share how much he appreciated a person or a moment. He was the guy who saw little value in the emotional attachments of insignificant things, and yet kept a stuffed panda on his bed for as long as I can remember. He was the guy who didn't care for small talk, but in my case, always seemed to know about the things that were happening in my life, and always took the time to ask me about them and to show support. Marco was a compulsively private person. I am sure he's going to haunt all of us for talking about him here today. But I don't mind. He didn't tell his story, but it's a story that needs to be told. We love you, Marco. We miss you, and we always will.
First of all, I want to thank all of you for showing up today to honor my brother. I want to thank family and friends who were there for us in a very challenging journey. So many people have asked, how did you get through it? Well, we have an amazing family. The people in the hospitals where Marco was, he was in 2 hospitals during those 2 months. And they were blown away by what they saw in terms of family support. People like Lisa, who happened to be down in Florida, making the drive in to see Marco. Nancy Green also came in. Gina Stella, Joe's daughter, sent a friend. She was in Kentucky, but she sent a friend who was a nurse who lived in Bradenton to check up on things. The constant phone calls and emails, it was wonderful. It was overwhelming, but it was wonderful. And we thank you for that. You know, when I started calling people, having conversations with family members now, not friends, but family members, saying that Mark had passed, one statement that I got several times was, I wished I'd known him better. I wished I'd known him better. Well, there were some very practical reasons why some of you in this room did not know him extremely well. Some practical reasons and some personal reasons. Now, the practical reasons are that, well, he did live on 4 continents in his adult life. And he was away a considerable amount of time from the time he got his bachelor's all the way until he moved. Well, gosh, he was in Tennessee. He lived in Tennessee for a year or 2. And that was a few years ago. So clearly, that's one reason, that you didn't see a lot of him during those years. But there is another reason, actually a couple of other reasons, that you didn't see him even when he was living in Detroit and Grand Rapids. And so, as far as who was Mark John Stella, hopefully I can answer at least some of that. And by the way, I think most of you know, he went by several different monikers. He was Mark Stella, he was John Stella, he was Mark John Stella, M. John Stella, and Marco Stella, depending on the circumstances at the moment. But for my purposes now, I'll refer to him as Mark. Above everything, he was a wonderful, an exceptional brother. Of all of the gifts that I have in my life, that is clearly near the top, that I had this wonderful sibling. Now, it didn't start out that way. When Marco was younger, when he was a toddler all the way up to, I don't know, maybe 8 or 9, he was a whiny, tattletale brat. His raison d'etre was just to frustrate me at every turn. Not only was he a mommy's boy, he was a daddy's boy. And it was just, the odds were overwhelming to me. And then one day, he comes to me and says, let's forget about this. Let's be friends. Really? He had this epiphany. He realized that we were going to be spending a lot of years together. We might as well get along. I was up for that. I wanted to get along all the time. And so he completely changed his tune on a dime. From that moment, our lives together were practically conflict-free. And any conflicts that we did have were resolved almost immediately. I mean, there was never a time where there was tension between us. If, there were times that I wanted to strangle him or he me, but everything was resolved quickly and honestly and lovingly. And so, to the day that he died, our relationship was always on a very, very high level. When that relationship turned around at the age of, again, 8, 9 years old, He wanted to be interested in what I was interested in, so I introduced him to the rarefied airs of FM radio. And needless to say, he took on everything in such a way that after a couple of weeks, you could have a real adult conversation with him about the different nuances in the guitar playing of Jeff Beck or Eric Clapton. He just took everything on and just decided, I'm going to be very good at this. He attained the moniker of the little professor very early on in life. People knew that he was special. When he was 6, 7, 8 years old, he was corresponding. He would write letters to the likes of Billy Graham and Walter Cronkite. When, at that same time, my only adult correspondent was Santa Claus. And he never, ever held it above me. The fact that he was labeled this child prodigy, this genius, not once. And I have to say that Mom and Dad were really, really good about that, too. They knew that we had different gifts. Well, they knew that Mark had gifts. And that I was loved. And they were good with that, and I was good with that. And so there was never any issue about, I've got this child genius living with me that lords it over me. He never did not. He never did. He was the youngest of any of the Stellas to ever work at the family company, FD Stella Products. He started probably at the age of 10. And unlike most of us, many of us here who worked, if you're male, you're Stella, you grew up in the 60s and 70s, you worked at Stella Products at some time in your life. You just did. But unlike most of who started in the warehouse on the 3rd floor with the likes of Wally Groh and Art Rinaldi, Mark started in accounting. He worked with Lulu and Mr. Beale, for those of you who might remember. Never got to the 3rd floor. No. 1 box of cups would crush him. So they knew better. And for those of you who remember Nikki, the receptionist operator, she taught him French on the job. He actually was speaking conversational French by the end of the summer. Tom mentioned his role as preacher at Jesu. And I do invite you, if you're able to read the article quickly here, we're also going to move the easels to the restaurant, or move the posters to the restaurant. That was a fascinating time. That's when we really started to get the sense that Marco was a spiritual seeker. And by the way, Jesu was not thrilled with his preaching on the steps, because, he could be saying something completely opposite than Sister Mary Black-and-Decker said, a few minutes ago in religion class. Mark skipped a couple of grades between 1st and 12th grade, and graduated high school at 16. He got his BA from the University of Detroit at 19. He got his master's from the University of Oxford at 21. And he attended a summer program while he was an undergrad at U of D at Oxford, and he just decided, this is where I want to be, and that's where he was. Shortly after his master's, he took some time off from his own education, and he got a job at Thome University teaching English. Not English to non-English speakers, but to people who were very proficient. So he taught English literature to Thais who spoke fluent English. He loved Thailand, did not care for living in that rather polluted, congested capital of Bangkok. So after a year or two, he came back. He found out several years later that he was so loved and respected that the lectures that he had taped during his tenure at Thome University were kept and were still being played for new students who were there. That's how much he was respected there. Then after some time in Detroit, he came back to Michigan. And then he decided to further his education, and the first step he took was to return to the land of his forebears. And he enrolled at Università per Stranieri in Perugia, Italy, and he received a degree in Italian. Then he returned to Detroit and got another opportunity to go back to Thailand, and this time to a more appealing place. So he really enjoyed his second stint in Thailand. And he would have stayed there for probably a while. As Stella mentioned, this is where he developed his interest in Buddhism. But then, even though he was actually enjoying life as he was living, he was working in the private sector, by the way, doing some translating and writing. Then he got an offer he could not refuse. The University of Western Australia offered to him a job of teaching, very, very likely, and giving him a PhD in Italian literature, or offering him the opportunity to be a student for free and then get paid a good sum of money for a very light teaching schedule. He took that opportunity. He was away from us from his time in Thailand, because he went directly from Thailand to Australia. Believe it or not, he was away from us. We did not see him for 7 years. And then he came back after he received his PhD, and he found a different landscape than he'd expected. When he was over in Australia, his mentor, the gentleman, John Scott, who wrote the letter that was read by Phil, he was able to organize or to facilitate interest at the University of Naples. And there was a gentleman at Naples that really wanted Marco there after he received his degree. And what happens? This guy in Naples dies. Natural causes. And whomever takes his place doesn't know Marco. Marco is out of luck there. He comes back to the United States, and he finds that over the years that he's been gone, higher education has taken such a different turn. First of all, he's in a very esoteric field of Italian Renaissance literature. Second of all, colleges are hiring more and more adjuncts, very few full-time people, especially, again, in an esoteric subject. I remember he refused an adjunct job at the University of Michigan, and when he told me how much they were willing to pay him, I had to agree with him. It was appalling. And so he became very frustrated at the turn that his life took. He started questioning, should I have gone to the University of Western Australia? Yes, he loved Italian literature very much. Yes, he was very good at it. He became, as Tom mentioned, a world authority in Dolce Stil Nuova, this sweet new style of the Renaissance poets. That was all fascinating for him, but he couldn't make a living doing that. So he did continue on. And a lot of people asked Marco over the years, so what is it you're doing? He hated that question. Because here is what he was doing. Number one, he was editing and writing. But he was editing and writing and translating such esoteric material that he didn't like to talk about it because it would just sound so pedantic. It would just sound so airy-fairy that he really chose not to speak about it too much. Second of all, he made a fairly good living in investments, in properties and stocks. And when people would say, so what are you doing now? He didn't like to talk about that. He didn't like to talk about, because he told me one time, I peaked too early. Actually, he told me that several times. I peaked too early. I was this child genius, yes, but look at me now. And I would feel so bad for Marco. You're doing okay. You're editing and translating, which didn't make him much money at all. But you've got your investments, and he was a pretty good investor. I'll say this: Microsoft in the '80s, anyone? Okay? Didn't get filthy rich, but he was able to, he had a nest egg. He did okay. And one of the reasons that we did not see a lot of him down here in Detroit was because he didn't like to talk about what he was doing because it did not fulfill the destiny. He wanted to be able to come to a wedding or a family birthday party and say, oh, I'm at this wonderful little college in Florida or California, and I published this book or that book. Instead, I'm living with my mother and I'm investing. I've got a couple of properties, and I'm translating something that you would never understand. Let me say this too. A lot of people, I've heard this from family members too. He's so smart, I don't know what to say to him. Let me tell you something. One thing about my brother that was marvelous. Yes, Teresa said he didn't suffer fools gladly. He wanted people in his presence who were intelligent, but he respected every kind of intelligence there was. Several of his closest friends did not even have degrees. It didn't matter to him. Yes, he had his scholarly friends, but he also had people from every stripe. And as long as you were good at what you did, and also my brother really appreciated storytellers. If you were a good storyteller, he loved you. So this idea of him being too smart for regular conversation, admittedly he was a little challenged. He didn't like small talk, as Teresa said. It was a bit of an issue. But if you got beyond that, you would find what a warm and wonderful person he is, and he would find what a warm and wonderful person and an intelligent person you were. And another reason that we didn't see him is because he was challenged with his hearing. Over the past decade, maybe a little bit longer than that, it was very frustrating. He was slowly losing his hearing to a kind of a scary point. It really was. I mean, I'd hate to call the condominium when Mom and he lived together, because if he didn't answer the phone, I have to talk to my mom. Hi, how are you? As Mark there, and then just hears Mark. He's not answering me. I wanted to get her an air horn. If she lived another couple of years and longer, she would have an air horn. They ended up living together. God bless my brother for taking care of Mom the way she did. Teresa and I pitched in, but it's a different dynamic when you live with someone who is slowly becoming infirm and handicapped. And Marco did that. Marco rose to the occasion. So one other reason that you didn't see him, especially over holidays, is we would always take Mom in, Teresa, myself, or just myself. And Marco would say, it's a day without Mom. I mean, he lived with her 24/7. And so when Christmas would come, he would prefer to spend the holiday in solitude as opposed to continuing to be her caretaker for one more day. And I understood that. I got it. So that was okay. So just know that even though he made himself somewhat scarce over the last few years, he still held a great love for the family. He loved family so much. I asked Margaret, and Margaret would say, yes, he talked about the family incessantly. I remember I call up one time, he said, it was over at Aunt Pearl's, she had polenta. She goes, yeah. He goes, you missed it. What do you mean? Joe was there. Uncle Joe and Uncle Andy together. To him, that was grand opera. That was something worthwhile. That was something that needed to be seen. He cared so much about all of you. So please know that. Please know that even though you didn't see him very much, he was there. As Teresa said, he had several passions. One of them was free food. And it is a Stella trait, really. The problem is you grow up in the Stella Products family and you go with your father and you eat at all of these openings, or they take out to dinner and the owner says, no. And all of a sudden it becomes a birthright. And to Marco, that's what it was. I did my very best to facilitate that in him. So he would send me on reconnaissance missions, parties with Teresa. And I had to make sure that when I went there, when I went to a party, I'd have to call and make sure that it wasn't just a bowl of Chex Mix and peanuts, that there was a real spread there. I go to fundraisers. I go to a fundraiser, $150 plate dinner, and I look at the table and I see somebody pick up their name tag. I call them, look, if you don't mind mentioning your name tag. I'm at Denny's. Hey, Marco, look, the table right next to me. They get up and leave. They haven't touched their fries. Get them over here before they bust the table. No problem. I want to end by simply saying a few words about the last days of my brother. As you know, I believe everyone here knows that on September 30th, he had a massive stroke. We rushed down there. We were there by the 1st. Margaret was there within, I think, 48 hours. And the first couple of days we were there, he was cogent, functioning, and could speak. And then he had a secondary bleed, and he was in a coma for the remainder. He did not speak after that. I think October 2nd was the last time he was actually able to really speak. He was able to communicate. He'd come in and out, and he'd communicate hand gestures, eyes, etc. But that's the last of it. Many of you here know the story, the little miracle, but I want to share it for those of you who haven't heard it, because it changed everything for the better. Marco was swimming, as he did almost every day, at his condominium in Florida, where he'd lived for 3 months. And it started to rain. So, obviously, he gets out of the pool and he ventures home. His condominium is 2 minutes away from that pool. While he is walking towards his home, he feels the splitting headache. He sits down. All of a sudden, he's lying down. He realizes he cannot get up. Some people see him and call EMS, and the adventure begins. I spoke to the lady. I happened to meet her at the complex. Here he is. He's lying down, and he cannot get up. When she arrives and offers help, he says, "Please just get me to my condo. I think it's just something I ate." She was in the medical profession. She knew that it was much more serious than that, so she called EMS, and he was taken to the hospital and had emergency brain surgery. The little miracle is that it could have gone a few different ways. If it did not start to rain, the incident very likely would have happened with him in the pool. And if he had gotten back to his condominium before the event, he lives alone. It's very, very likely that unless he was right next to a telephone when it happened, that the consequences would have been extremely dire. And Teresa and I were planning on leaving for Italy the very next day. And I don't think anybody would have ever found out about it for at least a couple of weeks. We were given a gift. We were given a real gift. Some people say, my gosh, the way this all played out, it's like he was destined to live. I didn't necessarily think that. I thought possibly that might be the case. But we were given the gift of having a last conversation with him and 2 months of ministering to him. And it was a gift. And it bonded Teresa, Margaret, and myself in a very powerful way. And for that, even though in the end the result is the same, we appreciate that. We are grateful. And finally, some advice, if you will. My brother planned for his parting years ago. In our house, especially since Dad died, death, end-of-life issues were not taboo subjects. Mom, Marco, and I, and Teresa talked about them like we were talking about the weather, because we know life is impermanent and that it can happen at any time, that impermanence. And so Marco had everything all set. I was his power of attorney, Teresa's secondary. I was his designated medical advocate. I had HIPAA clearance. All of that made such a difference in how easy things were able to happen. So I would encourage all of you, power of attorney is a lot better than just being next of kin, trust me. And if you're single, I just can't tell you what a blessing it is for the ones who are left behind, so to speak, the ones who are conscious while the other is unconscious. I thank Marco, because he spearheaded that. He said to Mom and me and Teresa, look, we all got to get powers of attorney on each other. We all have to sign these medical forms for advocacy. He did that years ago, and I see the benefit so clearly now that I have been in the position of being somebody's advocate and attorney, in fact. So thank you very much again for coming. I will leave it to Thome to wind things up here, and then we will have much more fellowship and food, which is what Mark would want for all of you to come here.
Thanks to the three of you for your eloquence of tongue and heart. Mark is a lover of words, but he also is a lover of